Theseus. Many years before Medea's arrival to Athens, King Aegeus had ruled the city alone, having tried and failed many times to father an heir to which he could leave his kingdom. Believing he was incapable of having children, Aegeus would travel to Delphi and ask the oracle for help, who would instruct him to travel to the small kingdom of Troezen, where the city's princess, Aethra, would bear him a son. Overjoyed, Aegeus would travel to Troezen and meet with Princess Aethra, with the two conceiving a child that night. However, unknown to Aegeus, Poseidon would also visit Aethra the same evening, with the child that was born, Theseus, being the offspring of the two men. With Poseidon's blood now running through his veins, Theseus would be granted immense agility and strength, something that would prove useful in the many trials that lay ahead. But King Aegeus, knowing that it was his duty to return to Athens, would leave the princess to raise the boy alone. Only when Theseus was old and strong enough to lift a heavy stone, under which Aegeus hid his sword and sandals, would he be worthy of traveling to Athens to claim his birthright, with the items he retrieved being symbols by which Aegeus could recognize his son. When the day finally came, Theseus, having reached manhood, would lift up the rock and claim his father's possessions, soon setting out on the road to Athens. But when Theseus arrived in Athens, Medea, his father's new queen, had already borne the king a son named Medus, who was next in line to the throne. And so when Medea saw that Theseus had arrived to claim his birthright, she feared that her own son would be deprived of the throne, and so began to scheme against him. When Theseus entered the palace, Medea would inform him that the only way he would be granted an audience with the king was to prove his skill as a warrior, sending him to fight the bull of Marathon, the mad creature that Heracles had wrestled with and brought over to Greece during his 7th labor. But instead of dying as Medea had hoped, Theseus would use his great strength to kill the bull with ease, soon returning to Athens triumphant. Shocked at his success, Medea would now attempt to kill Theseus, handing him a cup of poisoned wine as he approached the king. But as Theseus went to drink it, Aegeus would recognize the sword and sandals that the young man was wearing as the same ones he had hidden under the rock all those years ago, knocking the cup from his son's hand and saving his life. Realizing Medea's deception, Aegeus would banish her from the city before embracing Theseus as his rightful heir. Expelled from yet another city, Medea would return home to Colchis, where she would reconcile with her father, Aeetes, restoring him as the king of Colchis and living out the rest of her days at the edge of the known world. After living in Athens for some time, Theseus would learn that the city was in deep trouble. Many years ago, Athens had fought a war against King Minos of Crete, a war they would lose. To save the city, King Aegeus had signed a treaty with Minos, binding him to send 7 boys and 7 girls to Crete every 9 years, so that they could be fed to the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature that lived in a labyrinth beneath Minos's palace. Upon hearing of the treaty, Theseus was appalled and would immediately volunteer to be one of the next tributes, hoping to slay the Minotaur and bring an end to the suffering of his people. Aegeus begged him not to go, but when he saw he could not change Theseus's mind, he would give his blessing, only asking that if he returned successful, he should change his black sails to white, with the white sails signaling that he was alive. And so began his long voyage to Crete, where the infamous Minotaur awaited. But when he arrived on the island and was greeted by Minos and his family, Theseus would attract the eye of the king's daughter, Ariadne, who quickly found herself deeply in love with him. Wanting to protect Theseus, Ariadne would approach him as he was about to enter the Minotaur's lair, offering him a ball of thread with which he could trace his path back to the labyrinth's entrance. All she asked in return was that Theseus take her with him when he left Crete for Athens, a deal he was happy to accept. Entering the labyrinth, he tied the thread to the entrance and began his descent, following the dark, winding paths of the maze. He had been warned by Ariadne, however, that the true threat he faced was not the Minotaur, but instead the labyrinth itself. It was so vast and complex that all those who had entered had never made it out alive, with most starving to death in the labyrinth's endless twists and turns as they tried to reach the exit. After traveling for hours, Theseus would eventually reach the center, where the Minotaur lay in wait, with the two beginning an intense and brutal fight. It would be the most difficult battle Theseus had ever fought, but his speed and agility would prove triumphant. Grabbing his sword, he managed to stab the beast in the throat. Never again would Athens have to endure the sacrifice of its children. Theseus would then find the thread and began tracing his way back to the entrance, where he found Ariadne and the 13 other Athenian sacrifices waiting for him. They greeted him with a cheer, with the group soon escaping the island in their ship, beginning the voyage back to Athens. But Theseus, caught up in his excitement for having slain the legendary Minotaur, would begin to grow distant from Ariadne as he no longer needed her help. Along the way, they would stop and rest on the island of Dia, and when Ariadne was sleeping, Theseus would board his ship, stranding her on the island. Realizing she had been used, and that Theseus had no intention of marrying her from the start, Ariadne would be left crying on the island's shores, until, almost at the brink of starvation, the god Dionysus would find her, bringing her to Olympus as his wife. As Athens appeared on the horizon, Theseus could think of nothing but the fame he would receive upon telling his heroic story. Overcome with excitement, he would forget to change his black sails to white as his father had requested. And so, when King Aegeus saw the ship sailing back with black sails, a sign that his son was dead, he would throw himself from a tall cliff into the waters below, which would become known as the Aegean Sea in his honor. Having returned home, Theseus would mourn his father, after which he would be crowned the king of Athens, with his rule being celebrated by the Athenian people. He would go on to join Heracles in his fight against the Amazons, as well as helping Oedipus in his time of need, becoming one of the greatest heroes of his age.
Icarus. A famous architect and inventor, Daedalus was revered across all of Greece and had been tasked by King Minos with constructing a labyrinth so complex that no one could ever escape it. However, after Theseus had left the labyrinth with ease after following the string Ariadne had gifted him, King Minos was furious, imprisoning Daedalus and his son Icarus deep within their own creation. But the maze was so well constructed that even Daedalus could not find his way out. He would instead turn to his imagination, coming to the conclusion that the only way out was up. Combining feathers with wax, he would construct 2 great pairs of wings for him and his son. Although the wings would let them escape, he warned Icarus that they were extremely delicate and that flying too high would cause them to break. Flying side by side in the sky, Icarus was soon overcome with excitement, ignoring his father's warning. Higher and higher he would fly, soaring over the ocean below. But the sun's hot rays would begin to take a toll on the wings, melting the wax that held them together. One by one, the feathers fell out, until finally Icarus himself plummeted into the sea. The story of Icarus would pass down from generation to generation, with the boy who flew too close to the sun serving as an example of the importance of knowing your own limits and not being blinded by overconfidence. The Caledonian Boar Hunt. On the western edge of Greece lay the city of Calydon, a city that would become the site of the greatest gathering of heroes since the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. Ruling the city would be King Aeneas and Queen Althea, who would have a son named Meleager. Yet unknown to King Aeneas, Meleager was actually the son of the war god Ares, who had slept with his wife in secret, an affair that would draw the attention of the 3 fates, the goddesses who decide the destiny of each mortal. Appearing at the moment of Meleager's birth, they would find the baby lying on the floor next to a freshly lit fire. Pointing to a large log amidst the flames, they would sing a song of Meleager's fate. To you, O newborn child, we grant a gift, to live until this wood turns to ash. Overhearing the prophecy, Meleager's mother, Queen Althea, would run to the fire, quickly dousing it with water and picking up the large log that now controlled the life of her son. Wanting to keep it safe, she would travel back to her palace and secure the log in a chest out of reach from those wishing to harm her son. Almost 2 decades later, Meleager had become an Argonaut, joining Jason on his quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece before returning to Greece as a hero. But when he traveled back to visit his family in Calydon, he would find his homeland all but destroyed. For his father, King Aeneas, had been blessed by the god Dionysus with a fruitful harvest. With so many crops to feed his people, the king had become arrogant, forgetting to worship the goddess Artemis who oversaw all of nature. Furious, she would send a great and powerful boar to ravage the countryside, an enormous beast that would destroy towns, trample crops, and kill any who were unfortunate enough to be caught in its path.
With the boar destroying his kingdom, King Aeneas would send messenger birds to every corner of Greece, inviting the greatest heroes of the land to take part in a hunt to slay the beast. Leading the expedition would be his own son, Meleager, with over 50 other warriors answering the call. The first to join would be Meleager's trusted companions, the Argonauts, who had only just returned to Greece, with Jason, Euphemus, and Idas, alongside Pallas, Telamon, and the Dioscuri, all traveling to Calydon to take part. Next would come Theseus, the king of Athens and slayer of the Minotaur, as well as Iolaus, the nephew of Heracles, who had helped his uncle slay the Lernaean Hydra during his second labor. They would be joined by Nestor, the king of Pylos and wisest of the Greeks, alongside Laertes, the father of the famous hero Odysseus.